Welcome to the first episode of the second season of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for our second season. We're kicking it off with an 8-episode sequence exploring the new Unitarian Universalist principles which hold love at the center. Today's episode looks rearward at what came before, at the 7 principles established in 1961 with the formation of the UUA, and with some consideration of the 8th principle, which began as a grassroots movement in 2013. We'll begin with a very short summary of the founding of Unitarian Universalism, read by Mel Moss.
I invite you into a place of deeper stillness and reflection with this description of formation of Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism, UU, was formed in 1961 through the consolidation of 2 liberal religious traditions, Unitarianism and Universalism, both of which originated in Christian reform movements in Europe and North America. Unitarianism rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, emphasizing oneness of God and the moral teachings of Jesus. Universalism believed in universal salvation, that a loving God would not condemn anyone to eternal damnation. Both traditions emphasized reason, conscious, and individual spiritual exploration. Over time, they moved beyond their Christian roots to embrace a pluralistic, inclusive approach to faith. Their merger created a non-creedal religion committed to justice, compassion, and the inherent worth of every person, drawing wisdom from many religions and philosophies.
All right, Frank, let's put up the first slide. I'm doing it to you, folks. I'm PowerPointing you this morning. If you need to flee now for moral or ethical reasons, I understand. I'm just kidding. There's only 2 slides, but I think they're important. I wanted you to have some context for what we're going to talk about. When these 2 religions got together, there are a few things I want you to kind of keep in mind. 1, I come from the Howard Zinn Noam Chomsky School of History, so I can't read history without asking, whose propaganda is it? So let's talk about the public-facing story and the real story, because all things have 2 sides. Love has the sides of joy and sorrow, and history has the side of the public narrative that is propaganda and the stuff that was going on that nobody wants to talk about. And if we're being clear and honest and forthcoming, we tell both sides of the story so that we have the capacity to think critically about what's going on, where it's going, what it means. So the public story is, these guys were they found themselves at all the same protests, loving all the same things, and they decided that they should just join forces. And isn't that a beautiful story? And it is, and it's half the story. Those things are true. They did find themselves on the same side of a great many issues. And the truth is, both denominations were failing. Shrinking congregations, shrinking sizes, not enough energy, not enough chutzpah to keep their denominations going. And that is the underbelly of the merger, was that there was a soupçon of desperation about the thing. A not enoughness that you can still smell and taste lingering in the culture of the thing here 60 years later. A self-preservation kind of thing that comes out of a hardship, especially when you don't acknowledge that it happened. A clinginess, like we got to protect it. We got to keep it safe because it's going to die if we don't. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that that kind of protectionist attitude is probably part of the reason that they were both failing to begin with. You see, they had stumbled onto something quite wonderful, beautiful, and radical, which is that you didn't have to think alike to love alike. And that revenge and vengeance weren't really extensions of love. Two simple things, but they were heresies. And some of the folks among our number really like to claim them as heresies. Even in our own welcome information for our new congregational membership orientation that we're going to do later today, we talk about these two things as heresies. Unitarianism, the heresy that God is one, not three. Universalism, the heresy that there is no hell, no threat of eternal damnation hanging over your head. Both things that were settled Christian orthodoxy from the Nicene Creed. So, I know that sometimes when I do these little side journeys, you guys find it distracting, and I apologize, but here's one of them that just stuck in my craw, and I'm going to just say it out loud, and I'll probably do a whole sermon on it later. By continuing to be Unitarians, who do we exclude? So here's the weirdness, right? Like, we know that the Protestant Reformation was so full of people who were anti-Catholic Church. They were anti-papist, they were anti-Trinitarian, they were like, whatever. You pick the labels that belong on that side of the fence, and I'm going to pick the opposite, and that's where I'm going to stand my ground. And that's how Unitarianism started. It started as a combative, no, we're not them, mostly aimed at Trinitarian and Catholic powers, which, given the time frame and the power of the Catholic Church and its influence on European governments at that time, totally understandable, right? Why you'd be like, nope, that's a bunch of exploitive, hegemonic nonsense, and I want no part of it. So I'm going to define my ground by saying those people are Trinitarians, but not me. I read the Bible, and I don't think it says anything about the Trinity. God is one thing. Still biblically centered, still, well within sort of like the Christian culture of the time, but just we're not them. That's how it started. But by keeping the label, but here's the deal, right? Like, so Unitarianism has changed a ton since then, right? Like the humanist movement happened and the transcendental movement happened. And so Hindus who divide their God into thousands of pieces, and earth-based practitioners who divide their gods into thousands of regionalized practitioners are welcome. Atheists who count God as zero are welcome. Agnostics who count God as maybe one, or the square root of -1, are welcome. And Unitarians are welcome. If you think God is one thing, you're welcome. But let me get clear on this. You're not welcome if you think it's three. 0, 1, -1, square root of -1, 1,000, 1,000,000 are okay, but not three. Now, why am I on this rant about this? I'll tell you why. It was a real thing that happened. We were at the Poppy Parade, and my wife was wearing one of the yellow Side with Love St. Gabriel shirts. And a woman came up to her and said, oh, what, you guys are like, you're having so much fun, and what a great float, and blah, 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 and what are you? And she's like, well, we're Unitarian Universalists. And it's like, oh, I guess I wouldn't be welcome there. I'm a Trinitarian. It matters, folks. Like, what do we call ourselves matters. Anyway, food for thought. Let's get to the 7 principles. So, the biggest fight that these two groups had when they merged, like the most blood, paper, saliva, and ink was spilled over this thing, over these first 7 principles. That's where the rubber met the road, so to speak, at the convention where the UUA was formed. That's what they argued and fought and struggled with is, and I'm going to phrase it this way on purpose, how do we write the creed for a non-creedal religion? So let's talk about what's good and not good about that struggle, or the ways in which it was helpful and the ways in which it might have been planting the seeds for future discord. on the one place, defining where you stand and what you agree on is important. And as every religion that has existed has shown, creeds are like idols. They are addictive. And even when you don't call it a creed and you write it down and you live with it for 70 years, it turns into one anyway. The Christians did it with Jesus. They turned Jesus into an idol. We did it with the 7 principles. We turned them into the creed that isn't a creed. And you could tell that because if you were involved in Unitarian Universalism over the last 5 to 10 years and watching the fights that happened about the 8th principle and the fights that happened about we shouldn't leave the 7 principles behind, you can tell that they got stuck in people's brains as an identity thing. That's what idolatry is about. Have you mistaken this thing, this finger pointing at the truth, for who you are? That's what idolatry is about. And that happened with these. And that's not an indictment that's deeply problematic. It's an awareness that we should have about it. Does that make sense? It's not an indictment. It is a natural human thing. But growing into wisdom is recognizing those common human traps and frailties and learning how to grow past them. And I think that's what the UUA has done with Love at the Center. And that's what we're going to spend the next 8 weeks or so talking about. But we're starting here today with the 7 principles. Let's walk through them real quick, because I know that one of the reasons that it was requested that we do this sermon series was that we've got some people here who are new to Unitarian Universalism and who are like, sure, dude, I believe you, but I don't know what you're talking about. All good. All good. We're hoping, but hopefully when you leave today and at the end of each of these, you'll know a little more about the history of this church and the history of the movement that spawned it. But I also didn't want it to be a boring rehash for those of you who have been around a while, doing this UU thing for a while. So we're going to try and mix those two things together. The first principle, the first of the original 7, was the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I got to stop on this one for a minute. I can tell you that since I've been in this pulpit, we lost a member over this one. I was in the pulpit. I was preaching something whose Venn diagram overlapped with this number 1. And I had somebody come up to me after service and say, yep, I'm not sure I subscribe to that inherent worth and dignity thing. And you can guess who they chose as their scapegoat. That Donald Trump, he doesn't have any inherent worth and dignity. And I said, I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with you, but I hear what you're saying. But I'm going to dig a little deeper with y'all today about it. So are you saying that because you think that at the moment when he came out of his mother's womb, he had no inherent worth and dignity? Is that what you're saying? You're saying little baby Donald Trump was born without a soul? Is that the argument? I just want to be clear here, because time matters. We exist in this progression of birth and life and growth and dissolution and death. This is our reality that we inhabit. This is the nature of things. And so it matters when along the timeline, poor Donald became not a member of this inherent worth and dignity club. Are there things we can do in our life that are so bad that we forsake our own membership in the club of inherent worth and dignity? For those of you sitting there wishing that I was going to answer that question for you, I am going to disappoint you. Spiritual wisdom is often described as the ability to hold contradictory, competing ideas as both deeply true at the same time. This is one of those paradoxes because we know that there are bridges too far. and lines that get crossed by people in life that make seeing them as having equal worth and dignity real hard. People who have hurt us, people who have hurt people that we love, people who seem to get pleasure out of hurting people. There is a deep truth that hurt people hurt people. What's interesting to me is I haven't found anybody who hurts people who wouldn't hurt. And I don't know if that's just about the universality of trauma and getting hurt, or if it's just an invitation to remind us that there's always a deeper place to dig to find compassion if we're motivated to do so. Number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Number 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Number 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Number 5, the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Number 6, the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And number 7, respect for the independent web of all existence of which we are a part. So those were the original 7 in 1961. You can imagine that between 1961 and 2 years ago when they were replaced, a lot of religious education curriculum was developed around them, and a lot of sermons were written about them. I will tell you that as someone who loves a good heresy, one of my earliest ministers in my UU path called them the 7 banalities. Slightly more aggressive and derogatory than many UUs would be comfortable with. But he had an interesting reason for doing that. He said that these things were so bland anybody could agree to them. Now, I don't think that's entirely true. As we just said, somebody in this very congregation decided, I'm really not on board with number 1 and you preach about it too much. I think I'm out of here. Okay. That's all right. If that's not where you're at in your journey, then you go find a place that's right for you. It's all good. But it's not true that we're just, whoever you are, just come on down. We have some things that we stand on that if they don't work for you, this place is probably not going to work for you. Right? So, on around 2013, a grassroots movement started to add an 8th principle. This was about the broader, deeper cultural phenomenon that resulted in things like Black Lives Matter and Me Too. This was that was the upwelling that was happening in a socio-cultural way that resulted in this grassroots movement to add an 8th principle. And this was also the litmus test that told us that we had accidentally stumbled into the world of creedal idolatry, because the resistance against it was fierce and entrenched. But let's read the language of the 8th. The language is quite different than the language of the first 7, which was either, depending on which side you landed on, an excuse or a reason why it wasn't appropriate. We covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Now, I'm just going to let that hang out there for a minute, and I'm going to make another side comment. You can tell this is an American document. There are 2 reasons. One, We did the life, liberty, and justice thing, the peace, liberty, and justice. It just has that sousson of American, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness about it. Now, the second one is this. All the people who were excluded from that promise of what America was supposed to be, the unlanded, the poor, women, people of color, non-conforming folks of all stripes, they knew that you could write something that sounded real good, like the equality of all people, and then just not do it. Right? That's the world we live in. The country we live in made that promise, and there was like, yeah, but not you. Oh, and not you. Oh, and really, we just meant those folks, but we'd be happy for you to serve us tea. And we have some bathrooms that need cleaning and some crops that need picking. Would you be willing to do that? Yeah. And by the way, we're going to keep you undocumented so that we can exploit you without breaking our own rules. Is that okay with you? Oh, you don't really have a choice? Oh, I'm so sorry. Bless your heart. So, people who knew what it was like to be on the back end of a broken big promise said, I need new language. I need different language that tells me that you mean it. I need words like accountability and dismantle, or else I think you're just blowing more smoke. Fair? All right, that's Eric's take on number 8. Number 8 was passed by a great number of congregations, but in the flow of bureaucraticness that is organizational dynamics, it was never formally or officially adopted by the UUA because it was superseded by the adoption of the new love at the center thing. And we're going to spend the next 7 weeks unpacking the new love at the center thing. Can I take the next slide? Just to give you a preview, this is what it looks like. Let me just give you 5 minutes on why I think there are a few things about this that tell me that we're moving in the right direction. One, it has an artistic graphic with it. Now, I know that sounds like a funny thing to say, or maybe that's a modern marketing thing, but I mean it in a different way, and let me see if I can explain it. One of the things that I think led to the 7 principles being called by some the 7 banalities was they were so nailed down and hammered down that it felt a little over-rational. You started to wonder, where was the space in there for spirit? Where was acknowledgement of the divine? Where was any of that? Can you really have a religion without spirit, without passion, without divinity, without something that is holding us all together? I mean, we feel it with each other, but we're not allowed to talk about it? Help me understand. So, I think the strong rationalist humanist forces that were part of the 1950s and 60s that predated the 7 principles were expressed strongly in how they were written. And I think that this, with the influence of those folks who started protesting grassroots in 2013, has become a more holistic, more embodied, more artistic thing that says human beings aren't just at their best when they're rational. Human beings are at their best when they figure out how to blend being in a body and having passion and spirit and artistic creativity and rationality all blended together, and we do it together. That's the best humans. And I think this starts to get at that. It starts to get at it graphically. There's a sense of swirling motion in the whole thing that tells you, much in the same way that the yin and yang symbol does, that things are not standing still. You can't just hang this on your wall and hope it's going to hold still until you turn back to dust so you don't have to learn anything new. It's not that kind of system. It's a growing system. It's a system that's going to sprout and evolve and decay and die and get born again. It's that kind of system. It's a human and alive kind of system. So Love at the center, surrounded by 6 shared values: interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. And we're going to spend the next 7 weeks unpacking each one of those. Or at least with you listening to me riff on what I think about them, which may or may not be the same thing. I'm not sure. But I think it's a move in the right direction. There are a couple other things that I want to hit on. I've already, I think, covered this one that I had a note here for myself that says it's significantly easier to aspire to being non-creedal than to practice being non-creedal. I think we've talked about that one enough. If you're designing a system for change over time, don't leave the time element ambiguous. So, the UUA said, they knew how much they had fought over the 7 principles, and they said, we need to revisit these from time to time. Oh, cop out. Cop out. All right, I'll tell you, when I was at First UU Austin, and we did a new mission, vision, values thing, I insisted, I was not alone, but I insisted among others that it not be left ambiguous. We had a pattern that we had discovered where we had a tendency to fire our minister every 7 years. And if you wonder where that whole 7-year itch thing came from, if you study organizational dynamics, you'll see it is a real thing. It's a real thing in marriages. It's a real thing in people leaving their jobs. It's a real thing in people firing their ministers. It shows up in life as a pattern. And we said, well, if this is the pattern, then we need a matching pattern. So we said that in 6 years, we needed a new mission, vision, values process, non-negotiable in the bylaws. And when 6 years rolled around, people were like, oh, why are we doing that? But we rewrote the bylaws, and the minister didn't get fired. Because we started a process where we asked the community again, what is it that you value? How does it match what you're seeing in this church every day, every week, every month? What you're hearing from the pulpit, what we're doing in social justice, how does it match what's missing? And the new voices, the people who weren't there when we did it before, got to have buy-in on the process. And the people who had not wanted that minister to get hired before, they even started and were kind of just waiting for their chance to get rid of them, were invited into the room to be like, well, what is it that you want to see in this church? You can't just talk about doing it together, folks. You have to do it together. The work of figuring out what we are about. So, the UUA didn't do that. They didn't say, this is when we're going to do it. And you can tell they waited too long because there was a grassroots movement that said, hey, wake up. There's some stuff that needs to get addressed here. Right? And then it still took them another decade to get it done. For human, big organizations, that's not terrible performance. But it's also not great. So, light side and the dark side. Ultimately, they did it, and they came up with something good. The way they did it leaves some things for us to learn from about how to do it better next time. Here's my last ponderance. So I left you with a big ponderance at the beginning, which is, if we're all born with inherent worth and dignity, is there things that we do in our life that are so bad that we get excluded from the club? Here's another big question to ponder over the coming week. If, as I would propose, the most amazing and best thing about Unitarian Universalism is that they stopped fragmenting over disagreements about the 1% so they could unite over agreement about the 99%, if that was the best thing about Unitarian Universalism, why'd we stop? Why haven't we invited the Quakers, who are at all the same protests we are? Why haven't we invited them to join? Why haven't we invited other people from non-Christian alignments? Why haven't we said, hey, we're all siblings and brothers and sisters. We should be doing this together. Why did the invitation stop? I'm going to tell you a dumb story. I love my dumb stories. Y'all have to tell me whether you like my dumb stories or not. So once upon a time, I went to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir in Salt Lake City, Utah. And if you go there, there's a big spiral that you climb that tells the history of Mormonism. And when you get to the top, you're standing there with one of their acolytes who's there to do Q&A with you. And I got to the top and I said, I'm really impressed that you guys kept yourself open to ongoing prophecy. You weren't just like, oh, prophecy happened 2,000 years ago and then stopped, and then we just have to carry it through time. You said, hey, maybe there's new prophets. Maybe there's new revelations to be had that are worth thinking about, listening to, that inspire us to grow. And I said, so here's my question. Like, how do you keep your eyes and ears and hearts open to new revelation? And they said, well, I mean, after him, not really. Now I guess, new revelation would have to come from the leader of the church. And I took my glasses off because I like to do that for affect. My son will tell you. I took my glasses. I said, are you trying to tell me that you institutionalized prophecy? And they said, yeah. And I put my glasses back on and I said, yeah, good luck with that. Prophecy is the voice from the margin that tells you how you are wrong, or tells you a better way to be right. Prophecy is not a thing of comfort. Prophecy is a leadership thing, but it is not capturable. If you try to capture prophecy, you end up with a zoo animal. And as we know, zoo animals are not mistakable for their wild brethren. For one thing, when I see their brethren in the wild, I'm not filled with sorrow like I am when I visit a zoo. I'm not filled with a sense of despair that we've put life in a cage and pretended like it was edification. You can't cage prophecy, folks. You also can't hear it if you choose not to listen for it. So, for the next 7 weeks, we are going to listen for the voice of prophecy in these new principles. We're going to listen for the things that threaten the banal. We're going to listen for the things that invite us into a future worth inhabiting with each other and all of our brothers and sisters and siblings. Amen. Before we wrap today, I want to give a shout out to Bill Hornbuckle. During the reflections portion of our service, which we don't typically include in the podcast, Bill rightly pointed out that the 7 principles are a covenant of values that we agree to promote and affirm. A covenant, a voluntary agreement among folks of equal standing. Yes, it's true, and it's worth pointing out. I spent more time in this episode today looking at the underbelly of the thing, so I'm glad for Bill's reminding us of some of the healthier, stronger, and better aspects of the 7 principles. Thank you. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help others find it by liking and subscribing. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The Pulpiteer Podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. Our live recording tech crew is Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andrea McDaniel. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn.